What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I am once again joined by Sam Monson. He, of course, is the co-host of the PFF NFL Podcast and lead NFL analyst for Pro Football Focus. You can follow him on Twitter at PFF_Sam. Sam, it's great to be back chatting with you once again. Unfortunately, on this side of things, not after a Packers victory, but how was your week 2 in the NFL?
Yeah, it was good. It was another interesting game or another interesting week of games. Some fascinating outcomes from throughout the NFL. So yeah, fun second week.
It really was. I want to actually start out not with the Packers though today, because as we're recording this, some interesting stuff has been going on in Chicago. Partly Justin Fields, a lot of other stuff as well. Their starting left tackle is going on injured reserve. Their defensive coordinator is not there at the moment. There's a lot of interesting stuff. But before we get to the sort of breaking news, you also wrote an article this week. Is it time to press the panic button on Justin Fields? So we had that, first of all. Then we also got the news today that Fields wants to be less robotic, kind of threw his coaches under the bus. So I'll just let you take all of that from there and your thoughts on where Chicago's at and Justin Fields and the whole thing right now.
Yeah, they're in a pretty bad place, I would say. About the only good news for them is that they have 2 of the top 4 picks in the draft upcoming in the first round, given the way things are currently shaping up. But yeah, look, Justin Fields looks bad right now. He looks lost. And that's actually a bigger thing. It's not like he's just poor, or he actually looks like he's completely out of control, doesn't really know what's happening from a passing point of view. The games usually start okay. The first drive last week was great. He executed the game plan. He was throwing in rhythm. He stayed in the pocket. He did exactly what he needs to do. And then from that point on, I think it was the very first play of the second drive, he got sacked. And then almost from that moment on, the wheels fell off. And that's been a trend throughout the last year or so of his career, is at the start is good. And then once he has to sort of operate independently and outside of the script, everything goes south. And last week was a really, really worrying group of plays for him, where he took a bunch of sacks that were sort of obviously bad from the TV copy, right? You sort of look at me like, that looked awful. But sometimes you never know what's going on in coverage, what's going on with the receivers. Was it as bad as it looked? Maybe he really didn't have anywhere to go with the ball, and it's still a bad play. Right. Plays like that, guys like Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, they find a way to get rid of the ball or, make something else happen. So, but then you look at the all 22 and like, it's actually worse than it looked. There were receivers open, and not just open at the time he took the sack, but like open throughout the play. And in the direction he was reading, not sort of on the backside somewhere and late in the progression where he couldn't have been expected to get to. Just a horrible process. So either he's not reading what's going on correctly at all, or potentially an even worse scenario where he's reading it fine and simply hasn't got enough confidence in himself to pull the trigger and put the ball in the air anymore. Either one of those is a pretty catastrophic problem in year 3 for a guy that, has that much talent and athletic ability. And it's kind of crisis mode for Chicago at the moment, even independent of everything else that's sort of surfacing.
I totally agree. And it does very much seem that way. And he, of course, came out and he was sort of subtle, but not subtle at the same point. He was asked, why he felt like he was playing a little bit robotic. He had kind of said that he felt like he was playing a little bit too robotic. And then, of course, the reporters kind of prodded him on a little bit. And the first thing that came out of his mouth was coaching. And it was an interesting, tell right there that he said coaching. I think it was, also just, kind of interesting in general that, he thought he had too much to process. And this is always a dangerous sort of, place to be in, because your job as a quarterback is to sort of process all of that information. Now, I also get when you do sometimes have a quarterback like Justin Fields, and any quarterback, you want to let them just kind of go out and play within the rhythm of the game and let them have a feel for the game. And sometimes you can get that paralysis by analysis, but this feels like a complete turning point. And maybe he does just go out and play and feel confident, and we see a better Justin Fields against Kansas City this week. But if not, it just feels like this is going to be a slow burn until they have to burn this all down and start over with another quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, if that is a true indication of how he feels and how the kind of reality is, because Ohio State was an interesting offense when he was coming out, in that I had concerns at the time that it's very, very far divorced from any NFL offense. Like his role within that scheme was to drop back, stare down a target, wait for him to be open, and then fire the ball in his direction. And he was incredibly good at that. And he was incredibly accurate with those throws. But that's not NFL quarterbacking. Like you need to do more. You need to read more. You need to work through various different areas of the field. And you can't just stare down your number one target until the guy's open. It doesn't work that way. So, and that's not to say that anybody coming from a system like that can't do that. It's just that you're not showing it every single week. And that raises a question. Can he do that at the next level? So Fields is now in this situation where he's come from that system where he looked fantastic, and now he's struggling with that. And he's at least suggesting that he can't do what you need him to do in terms of a full progression, a full read, working multiple areas consecutively, one after the other. Now, that doesn't mean he can't still function at an NFL level and can't function well, but it sounds like it means he can't, function like a lot of other quarterbacks. And if you're going to have success with Justin Fields, you need to simplify or pare down what you are asking him to do and change the whole dynamic of the offense, which again is doable. Quarterbacks have had that done in the past. Quarterbacks can succeed in that kind of system. But number one, it's probably quite difficult to do on the fly in the middle of a season. And number two, probably does put a cap on how good he can be. Now he offsets that a lot with what he can do on the ground, with his rushing success. But it puts the Bears in a very difficult situation now where their quarterback is kind of openly campaigning for something more simplified, I guess is probably the easiest way of describing it. And now you need to figure out how to make that happen at short notice, on the fly in the middle of a season, which is a difficult spot to be in.
I can't remember if we talked about this a little bit last week or not, but I know you wrote about it in the article as well, of they haven't really run him at all in the first 2 weeks. And it does feel like that clearly needs to be a part of his game in some capacity. I think the striking thing, as somebody who obviously saw Green Bay against Chicago in week 1 and then Green Bay against Atlanta in week 2, Atlanta used Desmond Ridder in a couple very significant moments to carry the ball, specifically on a 4th and 4 touchdown run where they got around Rashawn Gary on the edge and score a touchdown on the play. They had a plan of attack with Desmond Ridder as a runner, and Chicago, with, in my opinion, the far superior rushing quarterback, didn't really do that. And I understand wholeheartedly if you want to go into the game being like, and just into the season being like, we've got to try to make this guy more of a pocket passer. I still want the fear of God in me if I'm a defensive coordinator for another team, or I don't want it of like that you're going to run Justin Fields at any time. At least like show it early in a game. Like it could come at any moment, at least as a bluff, if nothing else. But it just never felt like Chicago even had any interest in doing that, which does seem to take away his greatest skill set. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me. And they did this last year, right? It took them 6-7 weeks to have this epiphany of, hey, why don't we draw up a bunch of designed run plays for what turns out to be one of the most athletic quarterbacks in the game's history, right? Yeah. And as soon as they did that, everything changed. They went from, I think through 6 weeks, Justin Fields had 22 rushing yards last year on design carries. And then that went from like 22 would be a low game from that point on, a low single game. They kind of figured that out, that this changes the whole dynamic. And then it's like that information just fell out of their heads in the offseason, and they've completely forgotten those lessons that they learned and maybe have to relearn them all over again. But it seems crazy to me that you would not tap into that as a designed part of the offense with a guy as good as Justin Fields. I've been campaigning for the Falcons to do it with Desmond Ridder, even though he's not even in the same ballpark of athleticism as Justin Fields is, or rushing threat. And they have started to do that, right? Because it's low hanging fruit. It's sort of free yardage. It's cheap and easy plays because you're putting the defense in a really difficult situation in any of these situations. And the Falcons with Ridder, I mean, they did it from the pistol. Like they were going back to Colin Kaepernick plays to pull this out. So it's crazy to me that Chicago is not tapping into that as part of Fields' offense, which will only help him in other areas as well.
Completely agree. It seems crazy. I think something's going to have to change. My guess is we start seeing a little bit of it this week, but like you said, it's hard to adjust some of that on the fly. Now they play Kansas City this upcoming week, which is not going to make anything any easier either. So I think probably gets worse before it gets better in Chicago. But as you mentioned, It's going to be the Chicago Bear and Arizona Cardinal top of the draft next year, with probably both of them having 2 of the top 4 or 5 picks. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all shakes out with the quarterbacks at the top of the draft next year as well. All right, I want to ask you, kind of before we get to Packer stuff, one other question. You obviously see so much stuff through the course of the NFL and watch so much tape. We're only 2 weeks in, so it's still very, very early. But have there been any trends that you've started to pick up on through the course of the league? Anything that's in vogue through 2 weeks? Anything that's changed from 2022 into 2023? Just anything that sort of piqued your interest so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. The first couple of weeks, I don't think you ever see teams start copying each other yet. That takes a
Right.
while to happen. But the things that they might copy are the things that you pick up on, in the first couple of weeks. And this wrinkle or solution to a problem that Miami has come up with, I think, is very interesting. They've changed how they deploy their receivers with motion. They used a ton of pre-snap motion last year, but it was the same way that everybody else does it, which is usually one side of the formation to the other, or, one side of the formation to the other and back again. Miami is now getting these guys in motion on the same side and in much shorter spaces of real estate and time, so the defenses don't have time to adjust. They don't have, the time and space to roll their coverages, to swap assignments, to pass off different assignments pre-snap. But as soon as Tyreek Hill is on the move, he gets 5 yards to get up to speed, and they're snapping the ball, and he's gone. And the defense doesn't have a chance to change anything. They just have to figure out how to manipulate that and how to handle that on the back end. I think that's a really, really intelligent change up from what was happening last year, where getting Tyreek Hill up to full speed is great, but teams had enough time to figure out how to counter it and how to, make adjustments to their assignments on the back end. Now they don't have that time, and you're seeing what it's doing to them.
Yeah, some of those quick pre-snap adjust or like pre-snap motions are giving teams a lot of different complications on the back end. Anytime you can get those players up to speed a little bit more, and anytime you can just cause confusion at, whether you want to call it the mesh point or just at the line of scrimmage before the ball is snapped, all those assignments and those rules go into flux very, very quickly, and it makes everyone have to think on the fly. And the more you have to think on the fly, the more breakdowns you're going to have. And Tyreek Hill doesn't need a breakdown in and of itself just to be successful. And if he gets one, it's just over. So Mike McDaniel's just playing or coaching at a different level right now. I have on my to-do list to watch some Miami tape because I've heard some awesome stuff about it. So definitely going to have to check that out. I also loved, apparently somebody in New England has been playing Madden for a very long time, because everyone in Madden for years tries to take that player off the edge to block that kick. And somebody actually did it in real life and blocked the kick. So I'm interested to see in week 3 how many teams are using a field goal block in motion to try to block a kick in week 3 after the Patriots' successful block.
Yeah, I don't know that we'll get too many of those. I think they saw something very specific in the sequence of the kicker and the punter. Punter was a former Patriot player, so I think they knew something specific to that guy that was like, hey, as soon as he drops his head, as soon as he makes this movement, go, because that's the timing, right? I just teams can change that week to the next, and like he will have to change that 1 week to the next if that is what teams have found. And B, not everybody has that, right? So you might get a couple of teams trying that a bit, but I think that was very specific to that one game.
Very well could be. And great point on the punter being a former Patriot. Let's jump into Packers and Falcons. Just, 1,000-foot view. What was your sort of overall takeaway from this game?
Yeah, I mean, a close game. I think these are two teams in a broadly similar bucket in the NFC in terms of either one of those teams could make a playoff run, could, challenge at the end of the season. They're both probably in that sort of around 500 type of area by the end of the season, but they're also both moving in the right direction, I think. Jordan Love, he comes on and continues to develop over the course of the season, given how young that receiving core is, all those kinds of things. I think this was an entertaining game for that reason. Two pretty closely matched teams, two pretty exciting teams, given the talent that they have, and two relatively young and inexperienced teams moving forward.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think we saw some of that youth and inexperience in the fourth quarter for Green Bay. Sure, 12-point lead going into the fourth. Felt like they probably had things under control, and then things went in the exact opposite direction. I was impressed with Atlanta. I thought when Green Bay got that 12-point lead, it was they were just going to have to turn it over to Desmond Ridder and be like, all right, we're going to have to throw the ball a ton. And they really kept things balanced. They did get the big play on the flea flicker on the 3rd and 3, which kind of got them back in it. But overall they stayed very balanced throughout the course of the game. I want to ask you about Bijan Robinson as well. I'll be totally honest. I'm not familiar if you're on the don't draft running backs early in the draft bandwagon or not, and don't spend premium assets on it. I'm generally in that boat, but man, Bijan Robinson, and I know he's different, and we're starting to see that in real time. Some of the plays that he has, and I know everyone's seen the play where he jukes out about 3 different Packers on the same run, and Atlanta has a really cool, rooftop view of it.
A sky cam thing.
Yeah, it's super, super cool. Not awesome to see against Green Bay, but still really fun nonetheless. But your thoughts on A, Bijan Robinson, the player, and then B, does that change any sort of draft philosophy moving forward with these teams maybe now hitting on a Gibbs and a Robinson in the first round of this draft?
Yeah, my thinking on it has evolved a bit over the years. I kind of talked a lot about this pre-draft specific to Bijan Robinson, because I think drafting a guy high is a lot less egregious than paying a guy a big money second contract. I think that's the first point. So there's a lot more justification for drafting somebody high in the draft. Now, I think to start with, the question you always should ask is, do I need this running back to come in and fix the running game by himself? If the answer to that question is yes, forget it. Don't touch it, because he can't. He can't do that on his own. The situation needs to be there for him to have success before you even get him. So only if the answer to that is no, I already have a good run game, it can work anyway, now you can move on to the next set of questions. And then the case is, well, how high can you draft this guy? The first one is contract wise, right? The higher up the draft you go, the higher that contract goes, and the more money you're paying this guy, whether or not he's good, right? And that starts to get expensive when you get into the top 5, top 6. If you're 8, which is where they drafted him, you're fine, right? Bijan Robinson is now, I haven't actually checked where his contract slots in, but it's like he's one of the better paid running backs in the NFL, but he's not, the best paid running back in the league right from day one, right? So that's okay. That's fine. He's paid what he should be, essentially, based off what we're seeing from him. And then the other question is opportunity cost, right? And it's, what are you leaving on the table to draft this running back at 8 in the top 10 or wherever? That's going to depend on the draft. It's going to depend how the picks go ahead of you, and it's going to depend on your needs as well, right? And there are going to be times where the answer to that question is no. The opportunity cost to draft the running back is too great. We're leaving the best wide receiver of the draft on the table. We're leaving the second best edge rusher in the NFL on the table, something like that. At which point you have to say, look, as good as this guy is, it makes more sense to pass and to take the more important position and the more important need. But there are times where the answer to all those things lines up, and I don't have a problem with drafting him a number 8 overall. And I think Bijan fit into that category. The Falcons already had a good run game. Tyler Algier gained 1,000 yards last year. Every running back they used had at least 4.8 yards per carry. So Bijan didn't need to fix it by himself.
Right.
Number 2, the contract we talked about, it's fine. He's well paid, but commensurate with how good he is. And number 3, I don't think the way this draft works, it was low on blue chip prospects anyway. I don't think the Falcons were leaving any like ridiculous superstar on the board. The possible exception of Jalen Carter, but you can at least understand why that was a no. To do this, at which point draft him, and then you get into this extra layer for Bijan specifically, which is he might be insane. like whatever about how good a running back is. And I think generally this is terrible process to think this guy is special, to think this guy is a unicorn, this guy is different. When you start chasing exceptions, you get yourself into trouble. But every now and again, there's going to be an exception. And Bijan Robinson might be that guy. He might be the best running back to come into the draft since Adrian Peterson in 2007.
Yep.
Every play you see from him, like no matter how good you thought he was, you come away from that play thinking he was better. I already thought Bijan Robinson is special. And every time I've seen him this season, I'm like, I was too low on him. Like he is ridiculous. So all those things kind of align. I think the Falcons have drafted an absolute star, and they have the capacity to kind of keep him reasonably fresh and not, give him 400 touches in year 1.
And I think the other thing too for drafting running backs early that both Robinson and Gibbs have too are the ability to be impact players in the passing game. And I think that sort of changes the dynamic too. If I always go with like the Christian McCaffrey, if you can like literally move him out wide, and if you've got a linebacker on him, you're immediately scared. like that just changes the dynamics too. And Atlanta has two sort of unicorns in that way. And Green Bay got a little bit of a dose of this of, hey, if you're going to come out and you're going to play base defense against this team, they can put Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson out wide, and now you are in no man's land. We saw it on a big third down where they got Bijan on the one spot, and he just runs a slant. Devondre has to play off of him. They get a little bit of a natural rub / pick, and Bijan, it's just an easy as day pitch and catch to Bijan for a first down. So he's a really, really fun player. The first 3 drives, I think I noted, like he only got the ball like 4 or 5 times on the first 5 drives, and Atlanta didn't use him a ton. And because you were looking at it, like Green Bay had like a fairly decent amount of success. I think they got the interception. There was I think a turnover on downs and a field goal in the first 3 drives. And I'm like, man, Green Bay's defense looked a little bit better early on. And then I looked at it, I'm like, oh, they just didn't use Bijan that much those first 3 drives. And then he had that crazy run. And then after that, it was a bigger dose of Bijan, and the game entirely changed.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have a running back that is a high-end player in the passing game, it's huge. I think the splitting them out wide thing is a little bit overrated, but we saw in week 1 what Aaron Jones can do just in conventional terms, right? If you have a guy who moving him out of the backfield, just a little pivot right over the middle, if he's going to eviscerate the linebacker that's one-on-one with him, that's what you need. It doesn't need to be, I don't need to split him out wide. I don't need to put him in the slot. If he's just a mismatch versus the guy covering him, that's how we win.
Great point. Let's talk a little bit more about the actual Green Bay players in this game. I wanted to start with offense. 2 highest graded players for Pro Football Focus this week were the 2 rookie wide receivers, Jaden Reed and Zontavian Wicks. Your thoughts on Green Bay's two rookies at that spot?
Yeah, and I don't know that neither one of them was lights out, amazing, incredible, but they both played well. Jaden Reed in particular, like the sort of jet sweep touchdown that he had was an incredibly good run. Like he beat a couple of guys to get in there. When he got the handoff, it didn't look like that was really on the table, and he made that happen with speed and a little bit of power. Wicks doesn't show up in the stats. Remember, first play of the game, right? He's open behind the defense, and he draws that pass interference call on AJ Terrell, which is a huge play. Like, part of me, I go back and forth on this. There are some plays where I think wide receivers deserve to be credited with pass interference yardage. There are other plays where they just get lucky, right? And the defender just makes a terrible play, and like he didn't do anything to draw that. But Wicks was open deep, and you could absolutely credit him with that yardage. So I thought both players looked pretty good. Wicks in particular was really close to another couple of plays that would have made his stats look an awful lot more impressive. Had one in the end zone that was close to coming down with. So I thought both guys looked good.
Yeah, AJ Terrell had a couple big plays. The one in the back corner of the end zone against Dontavian Wicks was a phenomenal play by AJ. I think 90% of corners in Love and Wicks hit on that touchdown, but Terrell played it perfectly. And then I'm with you. I think the flea flicker, I think it's interesting too, the trust that they had in Wicks on that play. They could probably run that play to anyone. On the first play of the game, that's probably getting open no matter what. And they decided to run it to Dontavian Wicks, and obviously worked perfect. And I'm with you. I think he was open. I think he deserved it. There's another pass interference. I think it went to Dobbs later in the game where it was underthrown and the corner just tackled him, and Dobbs really didn't do much on the play, to your point earlier. So you do get a little bit of both of those, but yeah, I was really impressed with both rookie wide receivers. And yeah, that sweep to Jaden Reed, I don't know. I don't know that they've had Christian Watson could have done that last year, but not many Green Bay wide receivers could have made that play to the corner of the end zone. Also want to ask you on the defensive side, your highest graded defensive player, Quay Walker. I was very encouraged by Quay really through the first 2 weeks of the season, but your thoughts on Quay this week?
Yeah, similar story. Like, I don't think he was lights out, but I think he was quite impressive quietly in coverage as well, which is always not necessarily has been his strength over time. Came really close to a pass breakup on one play that was a nice read and a nice reaction to what was going on. Made a really nice tackle on Bijan Robinson in open space, which is not apparently is really difficult to do, judging by the first couple of weeks. And he was able to get one of those done. Yeah, just a solid game from him where he didn't make any glaring mistakes, made a couple of nice plays, and was really close to a big one that would have jumped his grade significantly.
Yeah, if he would have held on to that interception, that certainly would have been a game changer as well as a grade changer, I'm sure. But yeah, I'm just very encouraged. I think he's flying around much faster than he was a season ago, getting off blocks a little bit better. And like I said, I've been encouraged with him through the first couple of weeks of the season. I'm sure, Sam, you are probably immune by now, and PFF's probably immune by now, because every single time you put out a grade, there's going to be somebody that's probably unhappy with it in some capacity, one way or the other. Like I said, I've been there. I've been doing grades since 2017, so I get it a lot as well. But I know this week it has been the grades for Jordan Love and A.J. Dillon, respectively. In Green Bay, from Green Bay side of things, everyone very, very pleased, encouraged, excited about Jordan Love. Like AJ Dillon's like public enemy number one in Green Bay because of the, just lack of explosive running ability through 2 weeks. So when they see Jordan Love with a 59.3 grade in this game and AJ Dillon with a 66.9 grade, everyone, of course, wants to immediately lose their mind and be like, all right, PFF sucks. What are we doing here? So I just want to ask, obviously in this case, again, what did PFF see with Love and Dillon in this game?
Yeah, I think Love's grade jumped up a little bit again. I think he's up in the 60s somewhere now. There was one play that he got at a little bit of extra credit for, the corner route somewhere that got an extra little boost. But general point is the same, right? The two guys, broadly speaking, in the same area in terms of grade. Love, again, it's the same story as last week, right? It was the dangerous play that didn't get counted in the box score. He could have, should have thrown a pick six. Was it AJ Terrell as well in this one?
Yep, it was.
Where, away to the right-hand side. And so you look at that play, the receiver does a crappy job.
He does.
That's the first thing. So you look at it and you go, wow, I don't know if that's even his fault. That was a really bad play by the receiver. Corner plays it really well. But when you watch the end zone view, once it gets there, you see how far inside that ball was left. And that's the dangerous part of it. It's not that his receiver got owned in the route and the corner was able to jump it and get position. It's that ball is left far inside, which is towards the corner's leverage. And that's where it becomes dangerous, because now you're asking your receiver to make something good happen to avoid it being a really negative play. So that's really been the story for Jordan Love over those first couple of weeks, is he's played well, but in each game, there's been at least one play in there where there's been something dangerous that hasn't ended up being punished. And this is the concept that we battle against all the time. Like, there are people out there that simply don't believe that, well, if it didn't happen, it didn't count, right?
Yeah.
But the whole point of PFF grading is to try and quantify this stuff that happens, but you're not necessarily punished or rewarded for it in terms of results, right? Because that's how you actually evaluate how well a guy is playing, and theoretically how well he's going to play in the future is by accurately quantifying what he's doing. So with Love, it's been those plays. Dillon, I think he's just been unlucky. I mean, running backs we talk about all the time, right? It's that idea of, do you need him to do it all by himself? If the blocking's not there, the running back's not going anywhere, right? And A.J. Dillon is averaging, 3.7 yards per carry, something like that in this game. 2.8 of them came after contact. Like, he was doing most of any yardage he did get, most of it was coming after he got hit. Like, he was doing the heavy lifting by himself. So we talked about how good the offensive line is or can be. It just hasn't opened the holes for him yet, right? So that's his story.
The run blocking has been really bad for Green Bay through 2 weeks. And this week, Bakhtiari not being there and then Elton Jenkins going out certainly didn't help things either. But no, I posted a clip of every single one of his running plays from the end zone view, just so people could get a view. I thought there were a couple of runs that he could have done better on. Certainly there's the play where he trips over his feet, a couple of plays where he trips over his feet and doesn't keep contact balance that I'm sure he'd like to have back. But at the same time, even on the one play, the 3rd and 1 that everyone wants to talk about, he probably needed to stay up more and probably should have picked up that yard. The blocking wasn't going to get him more than a yard on that play, so it has been a little bit of both. And go ahead.
Well, that's why, I'm not advocating for the man to, be an all-pro or anything. That's why I graded in the 60s, right? Like, he hasn't got a great grade. I'm just saying that neither has got anything to work with, I'm
totally with you. And I'm so glad you brought up the Malik Heath throw, because I think it's a really interesting play as well, from just in general, the thought process, because you look at that play, and I looked at it as well. I'm totally with you. My first initial reaction is that's way more on Malik Heath. He got eaten alive. It's a great play by AJ Terrell. I think you mentioned the throwing inside, which I totally agree with, but I also think you have to figure out at some point as a QB, you have to weigh risk and reward. It's like a 3rd and 10. If that ball is completed, if he throws a perfect ball there and it's completed, it's probably 2 yards short of the sticks, and it's probably a 4th and 2, and you're punting away anyway. And so the reward is you're punting and you got 8 yards further on the punt. There's just no reward there. Maybe you get a pass interference play, but you can't hope for that. the risk is it's literally a pick six and it might have ended the game right then and there. So even if Malik Heath got eaten alive, and also you sort of have to be cognizant of who's going against who. Your undrafted free agent wide receiver who had played a smattering of snaps at best through the course of that game versus one of the best corners in football who was outside of the pass interference on the first play of the game, had a pretty dang good day and was really impressive. Maybe not the matchup that you want to pick on to throw a trust ball to Malik Heath against AJ Terrell in that situation. So I did think that even aside from the ball, the decision-making process probably wasn't the best on that play.
No, agreed. You can definitely question the decision even before you start factoring in the execution of it.
A couple quick ones, and then we'll get you out of here. First of all, Packers Saints this week. I know two guys that you've had very highly rated, Chris Olave on offense, Carl Granderson on defense. You don't have to necessarily talk about them, but anything you're looking at from a Saints standpoint. Also, we learned today Marcus May suspended for the next 3 games, so he is going to be out versus Green Bay.
Yeah, the Saints are fascinating on offense because their receivers are amazing. Michael Thomas might not be quite where he was at his peak, but he looks good still. And he brings something different to the other guys. But Olave, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed is an incredibly dangerous playmaker. That trio alone gives them just a nightmare of options to try and match up with. But then you have Derek Carr not playing particularly well at the quarterback, getting them the football. They're a really interesting team because of that dynamic. On defense, Carl Granderson, I think, is their best defensive lineman now. Like Cameron Jordan is aged to the point where he's still solid, but he's not the threat that he used to be. But Granderson is getting after it. I think they're another team in that they're not the same in terms of, young up and coming team, but they're probably in the same sort of bucket of they're probably still favorite for that division. They're a playoff type of team, but they're not like they're in the same area, I think, as Green Bay and Atlanta.
I think that's what makes this matchup really fun again for Green Bay is it's such a great litmus test for both of these teams. New Orleans is 2-0. They go on the road now to Green Bay. They're on a short week. They played Monday night. Meanwhile, Green Bay coming off a really tough loss. Can they pick up this is their first home game? Can they pick up their win at home? And you have this very young Packers offense, which is going against the Saints defense that, as you mentioned, isn't necessarily green and growing anymore, but they've got the DeMario Davises, the Cam Jordans, the Carl Grandersons, the Marshawn Lattimores. Like they've got a lot of veterans on this defense that are going to be very, knowledgeable and aware of what Green Bay probably is going to want to do. So I think that matchup is really fun here as well. Last thing before we get you out of here, I would be remiss not to ask you. In fact, I probably was a mistake not to ask you last week, but as a Irish-born person yourself, if I'm not mistaken, Daniel Whalen, punter for Green Bay, Irish-born. I think that hasn't happened in a very long time, if memory serves.
1980 something, yeah.
Yeah, 1980 something, and PFF's 5th highest graded punter right now in the NFL. So your thoughts on Irish-born Daniel Whalen?
Yeah, I mean, he's been playing well. Look, rugby background, how could he possibly fail? Irish-born, like it's tailor-made for the man to dominate the rankings.
I agree. And somebody said, well, will he be able to punt in the cold? I'm like, he's Irish. Give him whatever, Irish whiskey he needs before the game. He'll be able to rocket every punt he needs, known to man. So I'm very excited about that as well. And Green Bay's it's been a long time since Green Bay's had a solid punter. So hopefully he can be the answer and the long-term answer at punter for Green Bay. Sam, obviously everyone can follow you at the Pro Football Focus podcast, as well as on as well as on Pro Football Focus. Easy for me to say, but tell us where we can find your work and what you're working on.
Yeah, that's it. Twitter/X, PFF_Sam, and the PFF NFL Podcast. That's where you find me.
So much easier for Sam to say than for me to say, but always appreciate you. You do amazing work. Make sure to give him a follow if you're not following him already. Make sure to give the PFF NFL Podcast a listen as well. Make sure to subscribe there. Make sure to subscribe here on the Pack-A-Day Podcast. That's going to do it for us today. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.